So I'd like to introduce Jane Sinclair. She is from New Zealand. She's been an artist for 40 years or something thereabout. Um, and I want to turn it over to her to introduce herself. And when she's done introducing herself, I'm going to ask her to describe her process. And then she's going to treat us to a demo on mixing gray, different colors of gray with a limited palette. I will post the palette in the chat so that people can see it. And it's a really important part of landscape painting. And as you see her glorious paintings, you'll understand why mixing grays is so important. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jane. I'm going to pin her right now.
Okie doke. Are we away?
We are.
Hello, everybody from New Zealand. I was just saying to Lisa, if we get interrupted with a knocking on the window, it'll just be the chicken. So we'll ignore the noise. So painting, I was very fortunate to have a grandmother who painted. So my childhood has been around someone painting on the dining room table all my life. So yeah, she had us with a brush in hand when we were little preschoolers, I suppose you'd say, which was lovely. And she was a great watercolor artist. So that was my influence of painting. And I was one of these creative children who just doodled and drew all the time and was not interested in reading books, to mum and dad's horror, thinking, what will this child become? She can't read properly. Anyway, no problems. Went to universities. That's fine. So I did art at school, but it wasn't something I ever thought would become a career. So I went off and did a geography degree because I love landforms. So that was quite interesting when it's turned out that I've become a landscape painter. Did geography, went off to Europe and did my big OE and travelled around, and then realised I probably should be sensible and get a professional job. So I came back to New Zealand, and I'd always loved line, and I drew a lot of buildings in my childhood too. And so I went off and studied architecture and design. And the year I started was 1987, the recession. I assume it was a global recession. But when I graduated, there was no work for graduate architects. And I gave it a couple of years of going for interviews and things. And in the end, thought, this is ridiculous. What am I going to do? Because I can't keep applying for jobs all the time. It gets very depressing. So I had done a lot of, obviously, drawing at architecture school and form. And I thought, well, I can draw buildings. So I thought maybe I could do some house portrait. So I'd wander around local neighborhoods that had beautiful homes and put little flyers in their letterboxes. And then lo and behold, people would say, oh, could you paint our house? So that's really what started my my art career as a painter. And I had as much work as I wanted, painting watercolor renditions of people's homes. And then I started exhibiting along with that, the New Zealand Academy of Fine Arts, and that led to some teaching jobs and some commercial design work, doing illustration for stationery and greeting card companies, magazines and book illustration. And then it just blossomed. And before I knew it, I'd given up on the architecture thing altogether and decided I would become a full-time painter. And it was really good because I had 2 children in the meantime, and it was good that I could be mum at home as well as paint in the evening once they'd gone to bed. And then when they went to school, it was great because I had more time. So that's my career in a nutshell. I've been teaching for over 30 years now. I have regular weekly students and do workshops. I've travelled around New Zealand. And I love it. I have about 36 weekly students. They keep me on my toes. And it's lovely to be able to share what you do, what you've learned on your journey, because being basically self-taught, you've made every mistake in the book. So it's really good to learn the hard way. And then hopefully shorten people's painting journeys by giving them a few tips along the way. So I'm really excited about mentoring, because I think I can give feedback too on the business side of being an artist, as well as practical help.
I think that's wonderful, Jane. Can you describe your process to us? I'm very curious about it.
My slow painting process.
Your slow painting process, yes.
Yeah, well, I was a watercolor paint. Well, I still am, but I painted in watercolors for about 15 years, which was layers of transparent paint. And you're always sitting around waiting for paint to dry with watercolor, but it's a bit faster than oil. So, and then gradually going to I transitioned very quickly through acrylic, and then I popped in. Oh, we've got a Leanne coming.
Oh, nice.
Leanne. Hello, Leanne.
Hi, Leanne.
Welcome.
Welcome.
You know, I had to look around to find the link for this. It's not easy to find.
Oh boy. That's probably my fault.
No, it's not your fault. It's happened before. They're always in the Mastrius news, but we get so many of them sent directly to us that I don't always think to look there. Anyway,
well, Jane was just describing her painting process, which she self-describes as slow painting. So that's a really
Lisa and I we were talking about this the other day. And Lisa quite enjoyed the term slow painting. It's why I describe that as I really enjoy the process of painting. The outcome is great, and and especially if you're making money out of it and you're doing commissions or your gallery sales and you need to finish something and then off it goes and you let your baby go. But actually the actual process I enjoy more, because as a lot of painters, none of us, well, I don't think very few people are 100% happy with what they produce. We're always hoping that next time we will do this bit better or that bit better. And occasionally you'll go, oh, I'm really pleased with this. I don't know if I want to let it go. But so the process thing is really important to me because I like the fact that I can take my time and enjoy it. And with oil painting, I'm one of these people who paints layer by layer and I let it dry in between. So I need a few canvases on the go. Otherwise, well, it would be even slower. It was just one page. Although if you're working on a very large canvas, the underpainting part is the slowest bit, waiting for those initial layers to dry where you're blocked in. And if it is a large canvas, you can be working on one particular area. But I've learned over time to speed the process up a bit, the blocking in and the underpainting is so important. And it really doesn't matter if it's not right tonally or color-wise. It's getting the composition right, building up those shapes. And then every time you put another layer on, you're refining the layer before. So you start with your large brushes and your bold brush strokes, essentially, and your tonal colors, and you gradually refine it layer after layer till you get down to your small brushes. So I like to think of it, as I say to my students, we call it dark to light, loose to tight. And if you think about that process the whole time, that keeps you on track, because a lot of us, we detailed people, I mean, architectural background, very detailed person. If you start with small brushes at the beginning, you're fiddling away forever as you're doing layer upon layer. It can get very tedious, but if you can loosen up the underpainting, because it's going to be covered up layer on layer, and leave the small brush strokes to the end. And that bit can be the most joyful bit because it's the finishing touches that pull the whole thing together.
Mm-hmm.
So
do you paint with a lot of glazes?
Well, yes and no. Being self-taught, you just work out the way that you work it out. So I use a lot of opaque colors. So I'm an opaque painter. I mix white with most things because then you can put glazes on top of the opaques, and it's the glazes that make the color sing. Mm-hmm. But you can't, if you're just painting transparent on transparent, you're seeing everything that you've put in there underneath. And sometimes you don't want that. God,
what happened to me today?
Well, you can't move mountains if they're all there underneath, so you use the white mixed with your colors, the opaques, to create the structure. Especially landscape, I think of as being, it's not like cloudscapes, which is vapor, or even water. You know, it's solid, it's monumental. So by using whites and opaque layers on top of opaque layers, you're building up that kind of mass in that body. And that's why, you know, the whole slow painting thing starts, is because if it takes 5 layers or 10 layers, hopefully not 20 layers, but it all depends. All that's doing, and I'm painting in very thin layers, by the way, we're not doing any sort of thick painting. It means that it doesn't matter, because you're creating that solidity of the landforms, and it will reflect in the end of your painting. You'll go, wow, that artist has really made that thing feel solid. You know, you couldn't blow it away. But if I want to change the color, if I want to, say, create some beautiful afternoon light falling across that, you could call it a neutral landscape, then you take that lovely apricot light that you get in the evening, you know, so you mix your yellows and your reds or something, and then you can just do a transparent glaze and light the whole landscape up. So that would be my process, but the glazes might get covered up again. So yeah, I'm not a put the painting on and then wipe it all off again person. Put it that way. Does that answer your question?
So
Yes, it does.
On the average, Jane, how long does it take you to complete a larger painting like the one behind you?
Okay. So this one here, depends how much gardening there is. I don't know. I may work on something like that for a maximum of 2 months. It might be a month. It really depends. I can't paint for hours every day. I like natural light, so I don't paint in the evening. I teach in the evening, so that kind of is quite good. But I might do 4 or 5 hours, and that's enough. That's enough painting. But you know, that might have taken a month. I did it a while ago. I think they've got a lot slower since the early days.
Well, it's always good for people to hear, you know, from an artist like yourself, how long it takes. You know, I think that's a good thing. Yeah, so are you ready to move on to a demo?
Oh, yes. Yes, you've got to keep me moving. Keep me moving. All righty. Okay.
It's all good.
Well, no, I talk too much.
Oh, no, it's fun.
I'm going to. No, you're delightful. Always. So turn on your other camera.
Yes.
And then I'm going to unpin you, and we'll pin your other camera. So. So and you want to tell everybody what you're going to be demoing a little bit?
Oh yes, making greys. I'm going to talk about the importance of mixing primary colors, essentially. And so I'll flick camera now. Is that all right? So you're not going to see me, but you're going to see my little demo. So I'll just switch camera over here now. Okay.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, let's see. Right, it all comes up. So that's good. He's got some notes. So making greys is really important with landscape painting because it creates depth. And when I say greys, it's neutral colors in many ways. I mean, you can have many different types of greys. You can have blue greys or, red grey, yellows, things that are influenced by that base color that you're then changing by adding the other primaries to make it more neutral. So where I like to start is I have 6 core primary colors that I use, and titanium white. So I use 3 cool colors, and I use 3 warm colors. So if you look at this color palette here, this is referred to as the cool colors. I think a lot of people get confused by the terms cool and warm because they can look at a yellow and they go, but that's a warm color. But if you look at these cool colors, they are, it's written down as ones. It's phthalo blue, a cadmium yellow or a lemon yellow, something like that. And then I use a color called permanent rose, which is this most beautiful pink. And when you look at the color wheel itself, you'll see how the colors are very bright and zingy, and they're usually very transparent colors as well. And if you compare them with the warm colors, So that's a cadmium red and an ultramarine blue and a yellow ochre. So the colours themselves are far more opaque, and then they've got that sort of earthiness to them. And there's no reason why you can't combine both when you're making them. But as a landscape painter, I really do prefer this warm palette, but I might use one of the cool blues if I'm painting the sea or the sky. So if people can understand the importance of primary colours and actually mixing them, and what I do like to encourage my students is stick with these core colours to start with. And there are many different primaries that each artist will have their preference. But if you learn how to mix your primary colours, you can create infinite colours, but also it limits the confusion when you're trying to, especially when people put their painting down for a while, they come back a week later and they go, oh, I can't remember what colours I used. Well, if you've stuck to your core primary colours, you can't go too wrong. So that's why if you get to know what your primaries will do and then add white. So you can see in this example where I've added some white around the outside to some of those colours, and you're starting to get a completely different tonal range. And the more white you add, of course, the softer it becomes. And these are only like red and blue mixed together to create the purples. But if you were to take the third primary, the yellow, you will become more neutral. So that's what I'm going to do a little bit of demonstration now. So we'll move those aside. And oops, titanium white. I'll do is I'll put both sets of paints out. So ultramarine blue. That's the ultramarine blue deep. Some people, there is a one called light, but that's a lot more transparent. So the traditional ultramarine blue deep or French ultramarine is a lovely color.
I didn't know there was two.
Oh, I think it depends on different brands. So the paint I use is this Norma. Well, it's back to front. The Schminky paints, which is a German range of paints, and Norma is their sort of, or Schminky's the brand, and Norma is the range. Oh, I think they're all different. You tend to find the paints colors that you, or the manufacturer, I think that you really like and sticks with it, and there'll be variations. Right, so we've got those three warm colors, and I'll squeeze out. I'll stick this here. So that's the phthalo blue. For this exercise, I'm using the lemon yellow because I just happen to have it, and I don't use it much at all. Have this tube forever. And then this beautiful color called permanent rose, which is at some point in my mentorship, I'll tell people about how to teach them how to understand paint labels and what all the numbers and things mean. This is PV19 if you want to know the pigment number. It's beautiful transparent color. And then I use Winsor & Newton liquid originally, my medium. Whoops, the end of the bottle. Right, so I'll flip this over. Oh, something I prepared earlier. Which way will we go? Maybe we'll go that way. No, we'll go that way so we can see. Just got to fit there.
Yeah,
right,
that's nice.
That's all right. Yeah. So what I've got here is I've got white, and I've got half the board I've painted with a burnt umber. So it's given it a dark ground. So when I start all my paintings, I underpaint with a burnt umber, which gives us a nice dark color. And it's quite good to help judge your lights. So Lisa and I were talking about this, about we would put both on the same, and then you can get a comparison about relative colors. So we'll start with white. Now, if we're painting some distant mountains, we'll always start with a blue, because blue is the color that's in the distance. I'm very lucky to look out at mountains from my house, and so I get these beautiful tonal layers to observe every day. So there's the ultramarine blue, and it's a nice warm blue. And we might at the same time take the white, and what I'll do here, is we use the other blue, the phthalo blue. Can you see there's quite a huge difference between those? Yeah, as soon as you add white, you seem to be able to observe the colour better. Right, hang on, whoops, make a mess here. Now, so into this first blue, I'm going to add a little bit of cadmium red. And also part of the process of learning what your paints do in terms of colour mixing is you learn the strength of all the pigments. And so some colours are what I call my beware colours. Phthalo blue is definitely a beware colour. Cadmium red's very strong too, so you don't need much of it. So just take a little bit, you see, and that's going to change that quite quickly. And we might add a little bit more. And now it's becoming a little bit more lilac. So I'm just going to paint that here to show you what we're, oops, you can't see with my hand. There we go. That gives you a very pretty lilac colour, which could be quite nice for in the distance. Now I'm going to add a little bit of the permanent rose into this one. Now you can tell that the blue was a lot stronger and you need more of the permanent rose. So that's quite a little pretty lilac. And we'll put that one here.
Do you always mix your cools with cools and your warms with warms?
No, just for this exercise I am.
Oh, okay,
I will mix them up, actually. I used to, in fact, that painting that you're looking at, the Tasman Valley painting, it had a lot more of the South Island. So in New Zealand, we've got these two islands, the North and the South, which is very very silly names for them, really. Could have chosen better names. But anyway, the South Island is where all the big mountains are and the huge landscapes. And so I notice when I paint the South Island, I tend to use more cooler colours because the scale is so huge that the distances are larger. Whereas in the North Island, more sort of blues and greens, you use the warmer colours. So which brush is which? So what I'm going to do is I'll put them down this dark colour as well to show you. This is the ultramarine blue and then this is the cool one. And see, they look really light against the dark background, but they look dark against the light background. And these are things you learn because you've got to work out when you're painting tonal values into the distance, how they're all relative to each other. Now, if I add some yellow into the ultramarine mix, a little bit more, it's becoming more neutral now. And can you see how that's becoming more grey? So it's a little bit of each, and it's not, people think, say, if they're mixing a secondary colour, so they're mixing red and blue, you'll get purple. It's not half and half. It all depends on the pigment, the strength of the pigment. So if I add yellow to this cool one here, my little cool mix, put that next to the blue, you can see the yellow's having quite an effect. That's not that neutral yet. So if I wanted to make that more neutral and more grey, it's harder to do with the cool colours. If I add more blue, it's just going to go bluer. So we want to add the red into the mix here to make that more neutral. So it's still showing more of a lilac, which means that pink is having quite an effect. If I add yellow to that colour now, hopefully got the balance right. So it's going a bit green, but you can see how you can make very subtle changes quite quickly. If I add, what do we get to here? If we add more white into that one. By adding more white, you can tell it's definitely got that blue-red bias because it's got that sort of lilac-y tinge, but it's far more neutral in that one there. We paint it here. See it against the brown, I think it looks warmer. And this one, if we add more white into here, what's that give us? Yep, that's quite a neutral colour, and that's got a bit more of a yellow tinge against the brown. Yeah, that's grayer by adding more white. Now you can go on infinitely doing these things and go on and on and on and on and on. But you can see how quickly you can make lovely tonal colours. And if I was to add more white, of course, that's going to extend the range. to push it back in the distance, but I can also add more color into it and less white as you come forward and advance. I'll show you this one painting. I'm just going to switch the cameras over, Lisa. Here, and I'll go back to this, and I'll show you one that I've got used what I call my darker colors, but they're still grays. Can you see
that's beautiful.
that? Oh, thank you. So
That is
they're
just
still,
beautiful, Jane.
yeah, neutral. Thank you. Neutral colors, but they're dark. They're darker versions of what I'm doing. I haven't added as much white, but they've got a sort of this whole painting. I don't know what it's going to look like on the screen, but it's sort of more blues and greens. And so even the lighter bits that I've painted in here, they're all very opaque, but a lot of these are kind of quite neutral grays. There's so many different ranges, and I'll just show you another painting I'm working on at the moment, which isn't finished, but
Wow.
so can you see that?
Yes, we can. That's lovely.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Completely different colors, and you can see how I've add more white and those neutral colors in the distance mountains, but as I'm coming forward, I'm darkening them up. I haven't even finished the foreground, but the blues are getting stronger, less white. There's a bit more red in them, and then I'll be adding a little bit more yellow to make them even more neutral and darker. So you sort of use those warmer colors as you're coming forward. And then there's that Tasman Valley one, which again, it's a different range of greys, very sort of neutral in the background, and then using some warmer colors for the light as you're coming forward.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how much depth you can get.
I think it really does.
Yeah.
It is amazing. You really, the perspective is amazing.
Yeah, especially when you put in the foreground a lot of contrast between the light and the dark.
Yeah, you really have. Yeah.
It creates depth, because you think if you were in the distance, that where the light and the dark is on those far mountains, you know, that would look like that if you were up close, but because it's further away, the tonal variation is a lot, what's the word, it's far more subtle. So you want to create subtlety in your distance, and be brave and use stronger contrast as you come forward, and then using the use of more color as well. So those three, and then what I might do is just take what I was just doing on this little canvas, because otherwise I'd sit here doing little tonal paintings forever. I love mixed color. I'll swap over, and what I might do, I'll go back to the other camera, and I might I've just drawn in some hills, some kind of shapes, and I'll just do a little really quick, if for me, paint it.
We're going to stretch you.
How's the time going? Got time?
You're fine.
Oh, you've got half an hour, Jane. You're good.
Okay. Have we got 2 days?
No,
right. I might actually, what I might do is I'll probably paint this in the warm colors. So I'm just going to remove, the paint off this palette, or I could actually, and I'll just paint with those three, the three primaries with white.
should we be seeing the other camera?
Yes.
Yeah, do you want to switch cameras, Jane?
Yeah, I will. I'm just cleaning up my palette. Hang on.
Oh, you don't want us to see that part.
Oh, now I've created a rainbow. See, the thing with cool colors is they're so bright, and then you have to clean them up. I think it just all really depends on what you love in life. You know, all my teaching, the students all start and they have to go through the same process. It's usually landscapes I teach them with, but then they can do what they want once they've done these first 3 paintings. And it's always interesting, because I think when most people start, they just love color. And so they want in the brightest of colors, and I'm trying to teach them the subtleties of tonal values in the distance, which are very subtle, and they do struggle, but I think it's a good thing to learn. It's a good thing to know that you can fall back on it if you need to. Put it that way. So we're stuck with the rainbow, but never mind. Brush. Oh, I might even use a bigger brush actually, or we might fiddle around too much. Oh, I paint with a range of synthetics and bristle brushes. Got a big white out. Cleaned them. I cleaned my brushes for this. Make it all exciting. So let's just have a few. Okay, so what I'll do first is I will just paint the distant mountains, the back range, before I do the sky, because I want to show you what happens when we put the sky in. So I'll need more paint here. So I always
Jane, is it possible Jane, can you possibly move the photo reference down a little bit so we can see
the photo?
Oh,
it might not look like this. In fact, it won't look like this.
you get one good look.
That's what I'm working from.
That's a beautiful, beautiful photo reference.
We're lucky. This is my view, I'm very lucky. I've got this beautiful mountains in the distance. Well, the camera's zoomed in a little bit, but we're really lucky. So you can see from that photo reference, it's quite neutral, all these lovely neutral layers. So the back range of mountains are the ones that determine the colors as you're coming forward. And the thing with photos, I always say photos are just a starting point, or your imagination, or if you're plein air painting. But a photo, you've got to be careful that you don't get too hung up in trying to copy the photo exactly, because what you do as an artist in your style, even if you didn't think you've got one, what happens is it's going to change anyway, because you're going to interpret it slightly. And as I say, choosing a starting point for your distant mountains will kind of determine where you go in terms of colors. So I'm just going to paint, we'll start through here, and we'll make something quite neutral. The screen, it looks a little bit more purple. So we got, right, ultramarine blue for the distance. Now I'm going to need a lot more white. So there's a sort of a yellowy tinge to this. It's just because it's the color of the light. Whoops, crazy. Right, just make up plenty here. And I'm not a palette knifey mixy person because I'm lazy, can't be bothered. I just use my brush. And so you'll see me squash the brush down a lot and flip it over to get the pigment out. Because I just find if you use a palette knife, you mix way too much of the wrong color, and then you've got gallons of it, and then what do you do with all this? So I've added a lot of white. I've added a bit of the yellow and a little bit of the red into here. Now, if I put it there, it might be complete. Now it's going to look completely
perfect
photo anyway, because we're now painting onto a dark surface. If I hold the brush near that color, it's probably looking a little bit too blue. So I'm going to add what you mix on your palette, you've probably already worked this out, is what you mix on your palette often has nothing to do with what goes on your painting. It's because every color is relative to another color. Right, so that's going to add a little bit more red and a little bit more yellow into that. So in other words, you if you just I'm going to add a bit of blue. What I might do is I'm going to put something on, and then I'll come back and we'll make an adjustment after. So this is not how I normally paint.
Oh, well, that's too bad. I would like to see how you normally paint, but I guess we'd be at it for a while then.
Well, we would, but I'm already looking at this thinking, I think even putting in a lighter sky, this is going to be too light. So I'm just going to blue it up a little bit now. No, well, the thing is, because I love the process so much, I don't rush, and I certainly don't want to feel like I'm rushing.
You probably feel like you're rushing today, though, hey?
Yes, I do.
Sorry.
No. If I'm going to part of Mastrius, I have to learn to, work the way it works best for online painting.
When does your group start?
Next week, isn't it, Lisa?
It starts next week. Yes, next Tuesday, November 7th, Mountain Time, which I believe is Wednesday in New Zealand.
Yeah. So in a week, anyway. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this first layer in, which actually just looks like snow. So it's way too light, but I'm going to put a sky in to then see if we make a judgment. We might even make that a little bit.
So you often tone your whole canvas that umber color?
Yeah, I've started to do that. I used to always just do it on white, which is fine, but kind of just getting a layer of paint down. I'm more into this. Put something on, and it doesn't matter if it's not quite right, because you're going to change it anyway.
Yeah.
And it's another layer of paint. And it's sort of, it's encouraging people not to fear what they're doing. Oh, this is way too light. Never mind. Okay, if I take another brush and I paint a lighter sky with some yellow in it, it's going to make the mountains look bluer. Anyway. Oh, pretty. Oh, can you see? My arm's in the way.
Yeah, no, we can see.
Yeah, we can see. Do you find that it's harder or easier to judge your colors on that dark umber?
Depends. No, I'm kind of used to it. Some people like a lighter color. Some people use that ground color to inform their painting, and they leave little bits of it coming through, which can be really lovely. But I know I'm going to cover it all up. But I believe in painting, especially as you're coming forward with your blocking in and things. You see, look how grey those. I thought that they might have been a bit too light, but as soon as we're putting this yellow in, white with yellow, it's making the mountains grey. I prefer to do the dark, put your dark tones down. So especially when I'm starting to build up the layers, you want things to have a darker base, and then you put the lights in over the top. Because if you're painting a light color and you paint it light to start with, you haven't got many layers to go. In other words, if I was painting, say, white snow, and I just did white with a little bit of blue in it, if I want to show brighter highlights on that, it's going to be limited to, one or two more layers of white paint, and that's it. You're stuck. You've reached the end. If you start with a darker, grayer tone, and then build up your lights over the top of it, layer by layer. So if you start with a dark color, you can come down a bit, down a bit, down a bit, through the mid-tones. All right, okay, so there's some nice sort of afternoon, evening light in behind those mountains. I'd usually cover up all those little brown bits. Oh, gestural painting.
I think the comparative color is really astonishing, how much the sky color made the mountains turn a blue-gray. It's really amazing.
And they no longer look too light.
No, and they look so light. And even, you see, we all still doubt. Like, it doesn't matter if you've been painting forever or teaching. And I mean, at least with oil, it doesn't change color. Acrylic, it dries a tone darker. And most of my students, a lot of them, when they're starting, they paint in acrylics. And I'm always saying, you've got to be really brave and paint lighter than you think you need. And then they don't. And then I freak out, and I go, oh no, look, that looks way too light. And of course, then it dries darker. You go, why didn't you just stick with your gut instinct? So I'll just throw a bit of color in the sky here. I'm sorry, I'm wombling and rambling away, but never mind.
Oh, that's fine.
So
is this how your group is going to be?
I suspect it will be. It'll be very chatty and good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
See the real me, and that's how it is. I love it. I love what I do, and I love working with people we're all in the same boat. I'm still learning. God, we're all learning. And it's just so much fun watching what other people do. You give them the same information and then let them fly, and everybody's going to interpret things differently. Right, I'm just going to put some darker blue. Can you see this? Yep. Yeah. Across the top here.
Yes.
Sky to make that light. So this color is very similar to the back mountains. So we'll just whack some of this on. We run out of paint. Lisa, how are we doing for time? Are we all right?
You have 20 minutes, my dear.
Oh, that's right. We'll whack this out. I'll stick a bit more blue in.
Don't be stressed. You're doing great.
And if you don't finish, it's not the end of the world.
Okay.
No.
Good. Right, so we'll just make up. So you see how can you see what I'm mixing?
Yeah, all of them.
Yes.
Yeah, so I start with the blue, and then I'll bring in, and I'm really, so I use my brush and I push it into the paint like that from the side.
Mm-hmm.
So that way helps you minimize the amount of pigment you draw in, because when you're doing these sort of subtle mixes, you don't want to have suddenly too much red or yellow or something, then you've got to use an awful lot of paint to neutralize it again. Because if you scoop from above, do the old whoosh like this, you'll end up with far too much pigment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I do this sort of pushy thing where you can just change it. So we'll just, there we go, that's nearly the same color.
Very close.
And I tend to have the same puddle of paint, and I just play with my puddle I like to sort of stay in the same spot a little bit than having another pile and another pile all over the place, unless it's completely different. Because then you can, you create a lot more sort of harmony through your painting, because you're just sort of blending with the same paints.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that sky. Now, if we take take a synthetic, it might be a bit big. Let's take this one here. Now, this is where, this is normally there would be many layers, but we can do that beautiful blending when you take a synthetic brush along those edges. Just working on bristles. I'm just going to keep that one dry.
So Jane, was that just a clean synthetic brush that you're using?
Yes. I think that someone gave it to me as a watercolor brush, but it makes it really nice. Yes, so it's the synthetics that smooth everything out. The bristles will leave marks and texture. So they're quite different brushes, but the good thing about bristles is you can scrub them, you can scratch them. So this is, this will do for the sky. Gives you an idea of a nice sort of gentle, it's not the sky in the image, but it doesn't matter, it's an approximation. Okay, so now we'll come forward. Now we've got something to work from. And I'm just going to lighten up that distance. Hang on. This one here. I'll just make that one a little bit more yellow. And it's a bit lighter than the range in front there. So see how that's disappearing behind, hopefully. Mm-hmm. Okay. A little bit more subtle. Now I'm making a mess on the palette. There we go. Right, so that's sitting in behind. So now we're coming through to this layer here. So more blue. Some red. So we might go slightly purple, more purple this time. Yep, that's a good color. So this part of this blocking in process is getting these sort of approximations, your tones sort of right. So this might be, I'll do it as a sketch, but I might come back and sort of fiddle around later. Because, and I'm as I said, I'm not stuck with this just being the final tonal value. It may change, and then you want to put highlights and things in as well. But it's the blocking in. This is like the blocking in stage. Mm-hmm. Oops, gone.
I like that color, Jane. It looks
pretty.
Very natural. Mm-hmm.
You got mountains, Lisa, where you are? You're in Colorado. You got a view of mountains?
I have mountains. I have mountains right outside my window.
How exciting. Aren't we lucky? Right, now we're going to come to the next one. Now, so more blue. See, I'm still in that same puddle of color. add red, and this time I'm going to add a bit more yellow as well. So we're sort of going through blue into that kind of dirty purple, and then the yellow is now going to change that. So let's see what this gives us. Okay, it needs to be tonally a little bit darker. So you use the blue because that's the darkest color on your palette. And then I'll add a little bit more red in, and definitely a little bit more yellow. Yep, okay. What's that looking like on? Oh yeah, that's, can you see? Oh, we need to move it up.
There we go.
And by the way, I'm not even looking at the reference photo. We're not copying that anymore.
That's okay. So your reference photo, anyway, I know you're not copying it, but it doesn't have any details, any highlights or shadows in those distant mountains. But you said this hasn't even got any highlights on it yet. Would you do that?
Oh yes. So this, if I was to take this further as a painting, with the painting I'm actually doing, yeah, this would only be considered layer number 1.
Okay.
So then, and then I would go back to the, probably start with the sky next, and then I'd make my way forward, or I might just do that mountain range in the distance. If depends what you want to show. So I'm a great believer in keeping things kind of soft and simple in the distance without too much detail, because if you, I'm going to squeeze more blue out. If you put too much detail in the distance, then you've got to put all this more detail in the foreground.
Mm-hmm.
And less detail in the distance creates, you know, adds to that sense of depth. And that's where if you copy a photo exactly, what the camera sees is different to what the eye sees. So the camera will often pick up detail where the human eye wouldn't see it. So normally if we were looking at those back mountains, our eyes would only be focused on those, and then we wouldn't see that there was all this detail in the foreground, because that would be the peripheral vision. Or vice versa, if you're looking in the foreground, you can't see what's happening in the background. So if you try to put all the detail in everywhere, then you run into a sort of a depth problem. Because your eye's got nowhere to rest. It's so busy rushing around. I'm just making a slightly darker tone here. Let's see if that's slightly, we'll go a little bit darker.
Do you tend to stick with so few colors, and even on your larger paintings?
Oh, yes. It's become a challenge. The more I paint, the less I use. So I might, so as I say, I might bring in the other blue. I do use burnt umber, and I might use burnt umber in my mixes. That makes lovely greys. If you mix burnt umber and your blue, ultramarine blue, or both blues and white. Raw umber I really love. Can you see that that's changed again, that other?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yes.
And a way to, if you're, say this tone and this tone were really similar, and you're kind of stuck with that, but you went, oh, that's tonally too close. If you add, stick a bit of white, what you can do to separate them out is if I just stick a little bit, this would be like if I was doing the next layer, but if I add a little bit of light into this, into that mix, we'll just blend that together a bit more. Oops, I've lifted all the paint off. But you can separate the two just by adding a little bit of white into the mix. And then you've got that, and all that actually looks like mist or something, turn it into something rather else. Okay, so we'll come forward into this. Now this will have a lot more blue, just in here. And there's definitely, you can play around with warm and cool. In fact, that mountain painting that I'm doing at the moment, I'm using cool blues on the shadow, on the side opposite where the light's coming in, a little bit more of the cool blue in those on the snow. Really you get that lovely sense of cool light. Right, let's try. And always when you're trying color next to another one, go right next to it. Don't leave a gap in between like this. Some people paint like this and they leave the brown bit, but always test it right next to where you want to go. So I'll show you. So I'll add a little bit more yellow and a bit more red.
And that goes back to what you were talking about, Jane, with colors being comparative, and changing when you put it next to another color.
Yeah, relative. And then sometimes it helps you. That's why also when I'm mixing my color, I'm not, oops, what did I do? A lot of blue. When I mix my paints, I don't mind if I haven't mixed, unless I'm doing, say, a beautiful sky that's completely one color and flat, then you're going to make sure, your pigment's mixed in. But if you are, you might need to alter your paint mix. And so it's an approximation that I'm mixing on the palette here, because I might put that paint down and they go, oh, as soon as you put it next to something else, then it's that relativity. You can tell whether you need more red or more yellow or more blue. What's on your palette doesn't necessarily determine that. So this actually could go a bit darker down that end. See, it's dark enough there, but down here, because that hill is a little bit darker than that one. So
yeah, but we can still see a separation.
Yeah, oh, yes, you can, but it's more subtle down that end, and that's because this end is lighter.
Yeah.
And so that's a way to create depth as well. You can create that illusion. If you wanted to see how that even feels like, a lot of people go, isn't it amazing? It looks like there's a mist in the valley. So that illusion is created because we're putting something dark next to that, whereas it often can feel darker here and lighter down here. And it's just because this is next to a darker surface. And this will be it once we get down to the bottom, because then, then we can turn this painting into something different. And if you wanted, you could put the tops of some trees or something else a little bit more interesting. But it gives you an idea of just using the limited palette with a nice range of grays that you can paint. Get rid of all that brown.
Well, and it's really amazing. I mean, you've created so many different layers, or in atmospheric perspective here. You've gotten 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus your sky.
Yeah. And then you can imagine what you could do. You could do so much more with that. Yeah, and that's just the 3 colors. So yeah, imagine if you add a few more colors into it. But I like painting in these sort of opaque, I like these opaque layers, is they do create that sense of atmosphere. Because most skies, they have some atmosphere is what is it? Depending on what the light is, and I do like the sort of early morning or late afternoon light. It's full of particles and things when the light's lower in the sky. So you do get that sort of hazy effect a lot. It's not necessarily just from pollution or smoke or something. And also what painting in these neutral greys creates is a sense of calm. And so a lot of people say about my work that they can just sit and ponder, and it makes them feel quite peaceful and calm. And I think it's because because you're creating, you're not using primary or secondary colors that are fighting with each other. And I don't mean fighting in a negative way, because that creates a different type of painting. It creates excitement when you do put complementary colors together. But if you put these sort of neutrals together, you get this very contemplative effect. And I quite like that after having raised boys. And like all these kind of crazy clouds.
Sell your paintings to other people who have little boys.
And then you go, oh, I get to go to my nice happy calm. I don't need to feed them and wash and stuff. Anyway, I'm going to swap over the camera now. Is that all right? We had enough looking.
Well, Jan, that's wonderful what you did.
Okay, right. We'll go back to the camera.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes.
Anyway, there you go.
Thank you very much.
Have you got any questions?
Well, I don't know. I've been asking them all along.
There we go.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us anyway.
My
Leanne
pleasure.
has been the best audience we could have. So, thank you.
Yeah, because she's talkative.
Yeah, or Lisa and I we'd just be chatting away anyway, wouldn't we, Lisa?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've only
Honestly,
met Lisa recently, but it's
We
been
would be.
lovely. We've had some lovely chats here.
that's good. So in your classes, will you do like the first part critiquing and the second part demos, or how do you plan to run your classes?
Well, I think that sort of seems to be the standard way of doing it from what I hear and what I've looked at lots of YouTube videos. So I think critique's really important because we can all learn from critiques. Everybody, it doesn't matter whether you're listening to someone else have a critique done of their work, or even me. I embrace it as well myself. It's always good to get some feedback. So I think we'll focus on that and then obviously set a task, but it really depends on what people want out of this.
Right.
And because you've all coming from different backgrounds, you're at different stages of your careers, that's really important for me to know that up front. And then we can tailor it to where you're at. That's how when I do my small workshops at home, I always start that way. I just say, well, what do you want out of it? And then we go from there. Because it may be that you want to hear more about the business side of being an artist, or you want more demonstrations. And obviously, I've proved to myself I can do something quickly.
You can. You did
You
it
can
really
do
fast.
a fast demonstration. You did great.
But I don't know. I think questions come up. So I'm one of these. I've learned from doing a lot of teaching over the years that when I first started, I had a proper lesson plan, and we go through all this, But very quickly, you find some people understand things quickly, and some people take a lot long. They need to hear it in different ways, or some people get bored and they want to move far, and people are slow like me. So your teaching plan can go out the window very quickly. And I did do secondary art training, and I noticed that in schools that's when the boys start to get really bored. You're not keeping them entertained. Giving them something to do all the time, and then you spend all your time just looking after them, and you kind of forget the art thing. So it's a bit of a crazy.
Oh, I hope you don't have classes like that or sessions like that.
Oh,
I'm sure they'll be engaged.
I embrace it now. So when I do my workshops, that's how I am. I'm much more unstructured because a question will come up that none of us expected. And then it leads you off into a different place. And then there's always learning to be done there. So I'm very sort of fluid as a teacher or a mentor, beg your pardon. I will be.
Oh, I always call them the teachers too. That's wonderful. You're so flexible.
Oh, definitely.
It is.
Yeah, definitely. And so we'll just find out what everybody needs, and that's where we'll go. So it sounds a bit loose, but there'll be a lot of information to share. I've been doing it a long time now.
Yep. How many years have you been painting?
So early 90s, so it wasn't quite 40 years. Is it 30 years? 30 years.
I guess. I have 40.
Well, I was painting and drawing before that, but not as a professional artist. I've always done it since I was a child, but for 30 years. And all these different things have just happened along the way. I never expected it would turn into a career, which is amazing because every morning I get up and go, yay, you get to paint. Work, yeah. And I work from home, so I don't have to walk down the stairs. So I don't have to commute anymore. So that's fun. But all these opportunities have just
you're going to be.
Yeah.
I think you're going to be a wonderful teacher, Jane.
Oh, thank you.
And I hope that we can fill up your class.
Yep.
And I look forward to working with you and learning all of your witching ways on grays. So I think we're just about out of time.
We are, yeah.
But thank you, and Leanne, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. And we'll see everybody soon.
Yep.
No, that's very exciting. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Jane and Lisa.
A pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Jane.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.